Well, welcome, everyone. Next slide, please. As a reminder, as indicated in the registration for this gathering, by attending this Zoom webinar, you do acknowledge that this session is being recorded and it may be used for future UAGC presentations. We know you have many choices when choosing your professional development, and there are many opportunities here at the University of Arizona Global Campus. So thank you. Thank you for choosing us, Ed Talks, brought to you by the Department of Education and Liberal Arts here at UAGC. I'm Jackie Kiger. I'll be your host for today. I appreciate you being here. This is our third presentation for 2022, focusing on the power of one, empowering our students, which provides a foundation in our approach to instruction by getting to know our students, meeting them where they are in their UAGC educational journey, and providing continued support for them. Our focus today will be on the topic of sharing connections. And here to help us explore and extend this idea of sharing connections with her story is our own Dr. Teresa Handy. As you listen to her story, you might listen for your call to action as you consider the power of one and how you can best support your students through sharing connections. Teresa, will you come on video and say hello as I introduce you?
Hi, everyone. It's good to be here today.
It's great to have you here. I'd like to take a moment and formally introduce y'all to Dr. Teresa Handy. Dr. Handy is a core faculty member in the Master of Arts in Early Childhood Education Leadership Program here in the Department of Education and Liberal Arts. Formerly, she was the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Director at an all-girls private school. Her love of working with adult learners developed as a professor at her local community college. She's an experienced educator in public, charter, and private schools as an early childhood and elementary educator and as a learning specialist. Dr. Handy has served as a diversity consultant, helping local and national organizations develop their inclusion initiatives. She has presented at national and international conferences. Currently, she serves as a journal reviewer and is a published author. Dr. Handy is an active community volunteer where she makes her home in Memphis, Tennessee. Now, fun fact about Dr. Handy. Once, as an audience member of the popular morning television show Regis and Kelly, Kelly Ripa approached Dr. Handy and gave her a green scarf, as Dr. Handy was wearing a red blouse. Turns out, Kelly Ripa did not want Dr. Handy to get pinched for not wearing green, as it was their St. Patrick's Day special. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Teresa Handy. Teresa, thank you so much for being here with us. Next slide, please. I'm now going to ask that we remove our videos so that we can get started. As a reminder, Ed Talks are fashioned after TED Talks, the ever popular way of sharing personal stories for only 18 minutes of monologue. We do this because we want to hear your stories, and we can best do that by sharing our stories. Our goal here is not necessarily to teach you anything new, as you are already an expert in your field. Our goal is to perhaps motivate you to try something new in your approach to helping your students succeed. Our storytelling approach is geared to not take a lot of your time, but rather to simply set the stage for an interactive conversation and perhaps encourage you to further consider the power of one and your role in it. At the end of this Ed Talk, we look forward to learning your story of what you are doing or will be doing in your approach of sharing connections. Next slide, please. But for now, please hold your chat comments to the end, as I don't want you to miss a single word. And with that, Teresa, the microphone is yours.
Thank you, Jackie. Good afternoon. It is an honor to be with you today. As we begin, I will ask that you be mindful of the 3 questions on the screen as you listen to me. Before I get started, I want to establish a common understanding. Can we all agree that we carry stuff with us? You know, our life experiences, how we were raised. Can we all agree that we all have the stuff that makes us who we are? Our psychologist friends tell us that this is called our little red wagon. The little red wagon is an idiom for the baggage we carry. Well, I am here today to share with you some of what is in my little red wagon that has made me the instructor I am today, working with students in the Master of Arts in Early Childhood Education Leadership Program. I want you to know that I am proud of my journey and the journey of my parents. So I hope you won't hear my words today as bragging, but rather hear them as evidence of dreams not deferred. Hear these snippets of my life and realize that my parents were pushing through during a time when racial discord was the order of the day. Hear these snippets and know that my folks were working hard to figure out how to carve out a future for their family, just like our UAGC students are. So with that understanding, I will begin. I like to say when I speak that I am the daughter of a preacher and a teacher. I think it helps you understand me if I share that tidbit. Also, not sure you can tell from this photo, but I was also a child and now an adult who has a very definitive idea about who she is. I'm also a twin. See, here I am sharing my thoughts with my twinnie. Her name is Tracy, and even though our closeness ebbs and flows, there's no denying our twin superpowers. I think being born a twin makes you special because you naturally are connected to someone. So connecting with others can sometimes be a bit of a challenge. My sister and I were born in Providence, Rhode Island, in what was called the Negro or Colored Ward of the Providence Lying-In Hospital near Brown University. It's now called the Women and Infants Hospital. And our birth in 1968 was quite the news. You see, back then, my father was a young Black pastor of a white church in 1968. I'll just let that sink in for a moment. Yes, I know, it's seemingly hard to believe that my father was the pastor of a white church in the 1960s during the Civil Rights Movement, but he was. And here's a copy of his clergyman license. I think this fact speaks more to the ability of my father as a leader than about the state of racial relations at the time. My parents always told us that they discovered they were having twins 2 weeks before we were born. They also shared how the parishioners at my dad's church delivered just about anything twins born in 1968 would need. And I don't mean hand-me-downs or cast-offs, but the church members delivered beautiful things for the lives being born. The unselfishness and giving spirit of these people to our family speaks to how sharing and giving have always been a part of my world, and it crosses racial and socioeconomic boundaries. The church has always been an anchor in my world. I am sharing a bit of my story with you because I think it's important that you know how my background influences my work and how it's rooted in the culture of care that we know Dr. Donna Beagle, the founder of the Poverty Institute, encourages us to build at UAGC. A culture of care is one that operates under the assumption that people are making the best decisions they can within the shoes they are wearing. That is what I saw from my dad as he connected with people he loved and was dedicated to serving through his church. My dad was a problem solver, always looking around the neighborhood, talking to neighborhood folks, trying to figure out how to meet their needs. He understood, as Dr. Beagle says, that every environment is full of resources. He did this through connecting with people and using his God-given talent to bridge people so they could see they were no different than the people in the church building, or in our case, the university classroom. So many of us are like the students we teach, but we don't know that because we don't share our stories. Or maybe some of us don't feel like we are like the students we teach. And if that is the case, I will challenge you to get outside of your comfort zone and to learn more about the students you serve. As I shared earlier, connecting with others doesn't come naturally for me because as a twin, I had a built-in comrade. But alas, I pushed through, and I hope you will too, because my guess is you will find a connection to your students, because who we are and how we are raised, all that matters to our work in the classroom, because it's what we carry with us in our red wagon. So as we meet our students where they are, let's remember when they come to us, they each have their own red wagons full of their family histories and stories. From the very core of my being, the Protestant work ethic has been my North Star. It's not something I talk about, it's what I do. It's my call to action. When I'm not at work, my service in the community centers on literacy and how to advance the educational needs of marginalized children. Having an understanding of your why is so important because the work we do every day at UAGC with our students is a call to action, to share with them and connect with them so they can grow and thrive. Simon Sinek says, people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. The goal is to do business with people who believe what you believe. So in this case, it means helping our students see that we genuinely care about them achieving their goals and graduating from UAGC. My father always wanted better, not because he wasn't satisfied, but because he knew there was a better education than what he had had as a child. He knew there was better healthcare and housing. He knew because of his uncanny ability to do what we now call is code switching. Code switching is when you adapt to the culture you're in while recognizing and understanding that these cultures are very different from your own. He knew that access to better education, housing, and healthcare required an understanding of systems and how they worked. So that is what propelled him to push for more. He fought for equity in education in the rotunda of the State House in Virginia, and he fought for equity in housing in Milwaukee. All along, his goal was to foster a climate where everyone belongs, but also where everyone has knowledge and opportunities to shine. Speaking of shining, when he was a community organizer in the 90s, he met and interviewed a young man with an unusual name for a position with the Gamaliel Foundation, where my father was a community organizer. This young man would work alongside my twin sister and dad out in the Chicago community. That young law student would later become one of the most driven community organizers to become president, Barack Obama. My father believed in him as an organizer, and I think we can all agree that President Obama shone as a leader. President Obama is just like the students in our classrooms. And just as my father saw his light, our students need us to see their lights. They too are up and coming, and they need us to see their light and to help it shine. So that means encouraging them and cheering them on while maintaining a high standard of learning as they seek to obtain more education to better themselves and the trajectory of their families. But back to my dad. You see, my dad would tell you at some point that he was a proud son of a sharecropper and that he was the youngest boy in a family of 18. They lived in a rural town in Georgia called Ashburn, which is in Turner County, about 160 miles south of Atlanta. His family didn't have resources for college. There was no college fund, but my father figured if he joined the Air Force in 1958, he could see the world and get an education. As much as he wanted to see the world, he loved being from Georgia because Jimmy Carter was also from Georgia. In many ways, I think my father respected Jimmy Carter as much as he did, not just because of the Georgia connection, but more because they both believed in helping those who need it most. They are what you call humble men who proudly speak with a Southern drawl. My father was a gifted speaker, but would make errors when writing and speaking. And he often looked to my mother to help him in that area. She is the one who edited his dissertation for hours and hours. He knew that people judged him because he would sometimes say the wrong word, but that did not stop him. As Dr. Aller shared in her Ed Talk last month, called Barriers of Education, which I highly recommend you check out, APA, academic language, and grammar can be a bit unnerving for our students. And I know it is easy to go into the rabbit hole of correcting the mechanics of our students' writing. We must work to make sure that we see what the student is trying to share with us when the words and mechanics get in the way. So let's listen to them before we admonish them for not adhering to our oral culture and information sharing norms. Dr. Beagle encourages us to look for ways to include the life experiences of our students. And I believe you can get there by sharing to connection. Now, my father may have made errors, but he was a stickler about his children having a mastery of the King's English and spelling. My dad used to tell us related to education that we should get all we can and can all we get. He saw education as a tool to transform lives. And anyone who had a moment with my father would tell you that he had a listening ear. And because of that, people loved to seek out my parents for advice and help. Daddy was often the person called when a young man had a run-in with the authorities, and my mom was often the one in the living room encouraging young married couples. They both had their ways of connecting. However, when it comes to connecting with students, I sometimes have found it can be a challenge. For example, recently a student emailed me when I checked in with her about an assignment that she was stressed and overwhelmed. When I asked how I could support her, she told me that she did not like to ask for help. I emailed her back and said, "Send me your number and I will call you, so you don't have to ask for help." We chatted late into the night on Good Friday. We even exchanged text messages of best search engine words. So understanding the fear of asking for help is important because it's not always rooted in pride. It's often rooted in life experiences when asking for help did not always end so well. But you will find your own way to connect with your students. I'm not going to say to do what is comfortable because it may not be natural or comfortable. So I'm going to say to share something useful that you would not mind having on the front page of a newspaper. My father had a quiet way about him. Even though he had a bellowing voice and a belly laugh, in those quiet moments when my father would connect with me and whisper to me that I was smart and that I could do it, he believed in me and I felt it. I knew he thought I could do it, so that meant I could. In Dr. Beagle's research, she found that those who were able to complete a bachelor's degree were treated special as a child. She found that people in poverty rarely speak of a program for their resiliency, but rather a person or people who reached out to them. I know I can't imagine what my life would have been like without my dad cheering me on to be the best person I could be. Think about the it our students are trying to achieve, their degree. So whenever you have a chance, encourage them and notice when they are pushing through. Consider sending a quick email, even using the email tool Signals, which can be found in Canvas. It has some great templates. Recently, I had a student who did not want to communicate with me. Her email tone made me think that she was frustrated. So I sent her an email. I told her that I was going to tell her a fact. And here's the fact I shared with her. I told her that I wanted her to learn in my class and to be successful. However, I also told her I wouldn't accept work with a high similarity rate. I told her that I was there to help and that I was not her enemy. I acknowledged that she may not believe that based on previous life experiences, but in this case, she could believe it. Well, the student resubmitted her work a few hours later, and I graded it right away. I provided feedback, I maintained a high expectation, shared some resources, and just like I involved the student advisor when things were difficult, I circled back and shared the positive update and complimented the student. And guess what? The advisor complimented the student too. I wanted that student to feel the same way I felt when my dad told me he believed in me. I wanted her to feel the comfort in knowing that someone is in her corner and to really mean it. But that can be a challenge. Our students don't really know us. And without them knowing us, sharing to connection will be a challenge. But there are a few things that we can do. We can be intentional with not only the photos we share, but also the stories we share. I recently responded to a discussion post from my not so neat office so that the students could see that life is not always neat and pretty, but we still got to get the work done. So find a way to connect to the information students are sharing with you in those initial discussion posts, and be intentional in your comments. In another class, there were some names I didn't know how to pronounce. So I used Pronounce It on YouTube to help. Then I recorded short greetings to each student. I shared my vulnerability and asked them to correct me if I said their name wrong. Repeatedly, students thanked me for reaching out to them. As an open enrollment school, it is even more important for us to be faculty who understand our students who come to us from all walks of life. I know it's not always easy to make those connections when you're in the cycle of classes because the classes seem to flow so quickly. So that means we need to lead with flexibility and patience. I know, in all the busyness, you think I'll catch up, but inevitably life happens. For in my case, my father died. Last summer, my father died, and as you can imagine, losing my father created the most challenging mountain I've ever had to climb. I didn't think I could get through it because I did not have him in my ear telling me I can do it. But later I realized I did have all the times he encouraged me stored in my memory. When my father passed, my world seemed to stop. But in fact, the world kept moving. And that means the discussion post responses didn't disappear, neither did the Thursday and Sunday grading. I remember a colleague asked me, "Do I need someone to step in?" And I said, no, thankfully, I had loaded all of my weekly announcements for the course and that I would be okay. I knew my dad would want me to keep going, so I did. I also remembered something a former mentor said to me in my haze as I went through a challenging time in my life. She said to use your work as your solace. She said, when you walk in these doors, use your work to distract you from that pain. It worked then, so I thought it could work now. Yes, my grading was a little bit off and that was excused. So UAGC supported me in a way that made me feel valued. I call that the power of one in reverse. When I posted in the course, I made sure I checked on each student. I knew that some students in the course were dealing with great loss and had been open with me about it. The next day, I shared what was happening with me personally, and I apologized for my delayed responses. The students were all very empathic, including one student who from the very beginning had engaged in passive-aggressive emails with me, which led me to alert his advisor. This student sent me a personal note and expressed his condolences. He then shared that he was also dealing with grief, and he expressed his sincere apology for his tone. I told him I understood, and from that day forward, for the remaining weeks, the student was kind, engaged, and pleasant. So the student who had been challenging throughout the first few weeks, very combative and dismissive in his emails to me, never once shared what was happening to him until I shared what was happening to me. Once I shared with him, he trusted me to share his pain, and then I modeled grace and forgiveness. I didn't hold a grudge for his past behavior, and we moved forward with a clean slate. My sharing led to a connection that benefited us both. I was able to get out of my head and comfort him, and he was able to see me as more than the nagging instructor. To say my father was a pivotal person in my development would be an understatement. Both he and my mother poured their love and resources into me, my twin sister, and my older sister. Like I have shared, he was the one who listened to me, guided me, made me believe I could do anything. He modeled lifelong learning when he earned his own doctorate in his 60s. Not bad for the son of a sharecropper. And guess what? Our students are on their own lifelong journeys. Our students are looking for their anchor. They're looking to belong to something. And just as the church was my anchor, UAGC can be and is that anchor for many of our students, which is why our student groups, like the Department of Education and Liberal Arts Graduate Student Organization, is so important. I know our students don't show up willing to talk or share with us, and we only have them for 5 or 6 weeks. But what if we are better off for having taught them and they are better for having entered our class. I know that it may be too much for them to talk to us sometimes. Maybe they worry that we will judge them based on their previous life experiences. So I challenge you to ask yourself, what would you need to do to get to know a student like my father? All I know is that I'm not going to stop trying to connect with our students, and I hope they know that I'm cheering and rooting for them with the same "you can do it" way my dad used to whisper to me as we all work to reach the celebratory endgame, graduation. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. Thank you for sharing your father with us here today and his story, his background, his life's work that has influenced you to continue on a similar journey through the path of educator and advocate of diversity, equity, and inclusion. It certainly gives me pause as I think about how I approach sharing to connect with my students. I think for me, well, I wear my world on my sleeve, and I often do strike up conversations with strangers because it's just who I am. I find value in sharing with my students. Yes, certainly the course learning objectives, but as importantly, sharing myself with them in the ways of pictures or videos, written communication, phone calls. But I also know this might not be comfortable for others to share on that personal level. My students know where I live, where I bike, where I swim, and where I hike. They know my dogs, my hobbies, my family. And as a result, I know more of the same about them. And that connection opens the door to connect on those course learning objectives and hopefully take them further in that 5 or 6 week course with me. So I would encourage you all to consider how you might do that if you have not. And if you have, I would encourage you to share with us what you do in sharing connection opportunities with your students. Audience members, in addition to Dr. Handy's story I mentioned earlier, Teresa is a published author of a children's book that addresses how to have courageous conversations with young children about diversity of abilities. The book is titled, "I Have an Elephant in My Ear." I mention that as it's a testament of the value she places on early childhood intervention opportunities in paving the way with good information for early learners. And it takes me back to these questions. What are we doing in our classroom? How are you demonstrating your presence? What is the one personal story you can share? And how will you be remembered for having done so? With that, I invite you to consider and share now in the chat. But we'd also love to hear from you. So to share with us using your audio, simply raise your hand using your hand icon on the bottom of your screen, or it might be on the top of your screen. And then that way it will signal me who's raised their hand first and would like the microphone. You will then be given that opportunity to unmute your mic and share your story reflection. We invite you to join the conversation to inspire others with your story. I see we have some activity going on here in the chat.
Can you hear me, Jackie?
I can. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see your hand. I apologize, Julie.
That's okay. No, Teresa, thanks so much for your story and sharing the great relationship that you had with your father. I think a lot of daughters have a special place for their daddies, but one story that I always share with my students, because I feel like a lot of our students come from the same place of being the first in their family to pursue a college degree. So I always share that with my students. My father was an immigrant from Greece, and my mom is from New York, but neither one of them went to college, and that was something they always cheered me on for, was to just always pursue my education. So I definitely had them as cheerleaders, but I just share that story with students to let them know that, hey, you can do it too. This is my story, and making those connections.
I appreciate you saying that, Julie, very much. Julie is a seasoned ed talker, of which she brings up her father with great frequency because of that influence. And we so much appreciate it and look forward to her ed talk next year. So I'm seeing in the chat, Dorothy, I appreciate what you're saying about, I share with my students also where you live and those personal things. And you specifically mentioned, the passing of loved ones in your family. When we show what's a little bit on our sleeve, if you will, I think that really does go a long way for building that type of relationship that Teresa has shared with us today. And again, it's not always easy to do for several reasons. It's personal, firstly, and secondly, we only have a brief window to do this. But the course may be over, but if you have that kind of relationship, the relationship continues. The emails continue. Don't you just love it when students reach out to you and say, hey, I'm graduating, I'm just letting you know, and you have to go back through your notes and say, oh gosh, I had them 2 years ago. But it's exciting that they thought of you.
Jackie KB has her hand up.
Oh, thank you. Christina, let me unmute you. Let me try and unmute you.
I think I'm unmuted.
Oh, you are unmuted. Go ahead, ma'am.
Hi. That was wonderful. That was such a great talk. And I just want to say, I really love when you started talking about your call to action. I really connected with that. That's something that, in the beginning, I never really thought of it as a call to action in terms of my love of education. As I grew as an instructor, I started realizing that all of our students have their own individual calls to action. And it was sometimes hard to recognize what it was, but the more I got to know them, and I listened to their story and connected to their stories, I started really learning what their calls to action were. And it was so validating and encouraging, to just work with them and help them along their journeys and really see, what they want out of their lives and what their goals are and how they want to help others. And so I really connected with that with your talk. And a personal story that I always share, I also like to share about my father. He was a huge influence in my life. I am first generation college student. Nobody in my family, even to this day, has attended. And I think a lot of our students fall in that category. And so just connecting with them that we can all do it. We all have people in our lives that support us and love us and want the best for us. But sometimes we have to go our own way, and we have to, take our own journey, and that's okay too, and just finding our way as we go through it. So that's definitely something that I connected with your ed talk, and, try to connect with my students as well.
Thank you, KB. I think it's so important when when we're reflecting on our own journey, that we share those little tidbits and that part of our journey with our students. And I know it's sometimes hard to remember all those little nuances. So I think if one of the tips we talked about in our lookbook earlier today, Dale, I recommend you join that if you can, is that we talked about keeping files where we can kind of just pull from when we sometimes get too far away from those experiences. It looks like we have two hands up. Jerry?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I'd just like to share with you the area that I find most meaningful to me. I have a lot of military students in my classes, many of whom are getting close to or in the process of transitioning to a civilian life. And I remember when I went through that, and it's a very scary, frightening time for many people, because they don't know what to expect. They're not sure they can literally cut it in the civilian world. And so sharing stories about how I went through that transition and was able to create a career for myself. And matter of fact, 2 or 3 after that, I find students really latch onto that as an inspirational way to, if nothing else, we can do it too, if you can do it. So I just thought I'd share that. I think the military students are a very special kind, and having a chance to share my military stories with them and my family's military history makes them much more comfortable in communicating with me in the discussions and in the other communications we have.
Thank you, Jerry. Yes, I agree. I'm sure Jackie agrees as well.
I absolutely do. Thank you, Jerry. Thank you for your service to this great nation.
Yes.
Thank you, sir.
I found it. I lost it and then I found it. Kenya says, thank you, Dr. Handy. I enjoyed your story. You will keep moving forward based on your father's guidance and motivation. And I believe that that is absolutely true. And I share that, and thank you for posting that, because I wonder now how many of Teresa, Dr. Handy's students will keep moving forward based on her guidance and her motivation. And we can say the same thing of ourselves. As Jerry extends himself in his class, it's very important. To Jerry's point, at least 25% of our students are military affiliated. So if we have that opportunity to acknowledge and lift them up and align with them, then they will certainly keep moving forward based on that guidance and motivation also.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
I think we're all better for this talk today.
Exactly.
Thank you, Teresa.
Dr. Armstrong and then Dr. Reed.
Oh, hi. I actually put it in the chat. Thank you for sharing. So I was just wondering, like, what do you think is one of the most important strategies to give to a first year college student, or first generation, not first year, first generation college student when trying to build a supportive network, especially in an online or remote environment, because we know how isolating or lonely it could be. So I know you have, many of us already have our support systems, but what do you think one of the most important things is that we can tell those students in order to help them, be successful?
Yes. Well, first I would say that Dr. Kiger did a great grad talk on that for students, and that recording can be found. I think we can probably share that in the chat. I'm sure Jesse has that link. So that we have some definite support services within our community. I really encourage students to join the UConnect, the UAGC Connect community. For those people who are just creating this support network, we have to show them the way, right? So we need to tell them that networking through things like LinkedIn and student groups is one of the best ways that you can do it, but also normalizing that feeling for them. Sharing, if you are a first gen college student, sharing your experiences with them, but then also normalizing what they're feeling and point them in the direction for finding other students who are like them, and also professors who can support their journey.
And Dr. Armstrong, if I'm only going to get to say one thing to hopefully benefit my students on that journey, it's going to be around time management. Mm-hmm. And I tell my students that in the course I teach. If you're teaching a course that doesn't address time management, somehow figure out a way to address it in the discussion. Just an, oh, by the way, mid-Wednesday topic about early in the course about time management. I tell my students the course learning objectives will not be what challenge you. What challenge you will be setting aside time to learn about those course learning objectives and to do the readings. So have a plan, work the plan, plan your success. I can't say enough about having a conversation about time management. Allison, you're up next.
Hey, can you hear me?
I can.
All right. When it made me laugh when Dr. Handy was speaking about her messy desk. And I've found I used to I always do a video introduction to my students just so they can, see me. And I used to make sure I'd look behind me, see what's behind me, make sure everything was nice and neat. I'd make sure I looked perfect, everything looked perfect. And, I would blur the background, all these things. And I realized that I'm actually doing a disservice by doing those things. I'm creating a block between my students and myself by creating this kind of false perfectionism in my environment. And I think that when we're just more real with our students and, having come back from a run, sweaty and gross and dirty hair and just having the mess of laundry behind me while I'm doing a video lets them know that I'm real and lets them, I think they're more likely to reach out when they do need that help. So just trying to be authentic with them in a way that will be engaging for them.
Absolutely. And I appreciate you taking the time to just be honest about who you are and how busy you are and how things might look a little messy from time to time, because that's the world of success. And we want our students to be successful. If it was all neat to a pen, then everybody would do it, right? Surely. I said at the beginning of this talk, I did want to honor your time. We've had some great discussion here, and I certainly appreciate it, but our time is winding down. And as you know, all good things must come to an end, even this Ed Talk. So next slide, please. Please watch the chat or your screen for a link to the Ed Talk homepage. I'm going to put that in shortly, where this is a recorded Ed Talk will be archived for future viewing, along with certificates of participation. You'll find the link also in your invitation that was sent to you today. But I believe here, yep, should be in the chat now. Next slide, please. We want to acknowledge the work of Dr. Donna Beagle of Communications Across Barriers, as well as the members of the UAGC community for the dedication in university-wide Power of One initiative. Please mark your calendars for every Thursday of the month, same time, every third Thursday of the month, same time, same place, to continue our Ed Talks and conversation. Next slide, please. And be sure to watch an email for an announcement for next month's Ed Talk, where Dr. Jessie Upshaw will bring her story of coaching the marathon in the online classroom. We appreciate you joining us today, and a huge thank you again to Dr. Teresa Handy for sharing with us to inspire our next steps in supporting our students and each other. On behalf of the Department of Education and Liberal Arts and our chair, Dr. Denise Maxwell, we thank you for being here. We'll see y'all next month. Bye now.